So here it goes. The blossoms are a necklace, and the branches are a neck. The winding of the valley a forearm, and the stream a bracelet. In a garden whose shade resembled the darkness of lips, and blossoms appeared as fine white teeth. Now, what I've just read for you is a poetic description of a garden in Al-Andalus. You can hear how the poetry humanizes nature, comparing flower blossoms to a necklace and a water stream to a bracelet. Now, to me, and I'm no literary expert, the poem sounds incredibly modern. But the author of this text is not a contemporary writer. The, so while the next line is coming on. So the poet of that poetry I just read went by the name Ibn Tafasha. He was born in 1058. He was born in 1058 in what is today called Alcira, in the province of Valencia, Spain. And apologies for my accent. It's been some time since I've really worked on my Spanish. So Spanish speakers in the audience, please feel free to help me out. Now, during his lifetime, the city was part of a region called Al-Andalus. Now, surrounded by a landscape as majestic as this one, it's easy to see why nature was such a source of wonder and why the people of Al-Andalus appreciated poetry dedicated to glorifying God and nature. Now, Ibn Khaldun became famous for his innovative poetry, which was filled with enamored descriptions of Andalusian landscapes. The people of Al-Andalus nicknamed him Al-Janan, the gardener. He was first and foremost a great poet of gardens and landscapes, and he surpassed all of his poetic predecessors. One of his contemporaries said that there was no poet in the East or the West who could equal Ibn Tafasha. So this evening, we're going to explore the medieval Islamic gardens of Al-Andalus that inspired emotional worlds of joy, sorrow, hope, and wonder. This presentation is inspired by the courses that I teach at UPC on Islamic history during the so-called medieval period, and by a fantastic exhibition of Al-Andalus at the Sharjah Museum of Islamic Civilization. So therefore, in recognizing that these gardens meant so much more than beautiful Arabic words written in manuscripts, I'm going to take you on a multi-sensory journey of this past before you continue that journey into some very real picturesque gardens outside. Now, as you've already probably heard me tell some of you before we started, I've been asking you to pass around some scented blotters. So if you haven't received those yet, please feel free to pass them around. We have little worksheets if you want to fill out your guesses. I'm sorry, there's no prize for you, just my adoration. But see how well you do. Some of these are on the easier side, some of them are on the harder side. There is no number 8. I apologize. I made an error when booking and purchasing these sets, so there's no number 8. But otherwise, feel free to fill out the little piece of paper. Okay, next slide. So, for those who may not know, the term Al-Andalus refers to the region in the Iberian Peninsula controlled by various Muslim states between 711 and 1492 CE. I'm not going to cover all the Islamic dynasties. There are many, many, many dynasties that we can talk about. But I want to zoom out for a minute and show you what is happening in the wider Islamic world at this time. Slide. So the Umayyad dynasty established their state, which is called a caliphate, in 661, and it became the largest empire that the world has seen at that time. Now remember the Umayyads, they're going to come back later. Next slide. When the Umayyad Caliphate was overthrown a century later by a dynasty called the Classids in 750, one of the Umayyad princes who survived named Rama I, leaves the former capital of Damascus and travels all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. There, he establishes an independent Muslim state called the Emir of Cordoba, which he does in 756. And the city of Cordoba, coming from the Arabic Cordoba, was made the capital and quickly, again, became one of these very large, prosperous cities known to all the world at this time. Now, a few decades later, in 785, Abd al-Rahman established the Great Mosque of Cordoba. This important, it's beautiful. Has anyone been? Yay! Yeah, beautiful. I highly encourage you all to go if you have not been. This important example of architecture was originally a disaffected church, and it was divided and shared between Muslims and Christians after the Umayyad conquest. And that was a sharing arrangement that lasted until 785, when the Christian half of the structure was purchased by Abd al-Rahman, and the structure was then refashioned as the Great Mosque of Cordoba. In return, he purchased the Christian half, and he also allowed Christians to rebuild other ruined churches in the region. Now, the Great Mosque only took about a year to rebuild, partly because they were reusing former materials from the Romans, from the Visigoths. And if you look closely, particularly on the left-hand photo, you might see some of these columns and capitals that were being reused and reworked into the structure. But that's architecture. Let me tell you about some gardens. So the courtyard of the Great Mosque was planted, not least with things like palm trees, starting around 808 CE. That makes this courtyard very likely the oldest surviving continuously planted Islamic garden in the world. And while we're here, we've arrived at our first set. So, for anyone who's brave enough to give me a guess, what did you guess during the percent number one? Okay, now I'm going to be a pain right now. You're not wrong. It is orange, but it's a particular species of orange. So it's a particular, it's very likely one of Valencia. It's, you can go ahead and click on it. Bitter orange. So in Andalus, this scent was called Navani. And as I'm going through the talk today, I'm going to give you the terms that medieval people in Al-Andalus used. So this may be similar or different than the Arabic words you will hear today, and you might hear some resonances to contemporary Spanish words. So Arabs introduced orange trees to Al-Andalus in the 10th and 11th centuries. The beautiful fruits and fragrant flowers of these trees enhance the gardens of many mosques, including at Cordoba. In Al-Andalus, only bitter orange, which is native to Southeast Asia, only bitter orange was known to Al-Andalus at the time, because the sweet orange, which comes from China, was not introduced until the 16th century. So the flowers of the orange tree were distilled to create a perfume that would have been used in cosmetics, also to flavor drinks and sweets. And the orange peel was also used. Any guesses what the orange peel was used for? Could be. There's one application, particularly to the skin. Deodorant. Yes, when applied to the skin, it could be used as deodorant. So today, this courtyard in Cordoba is called the Patio de los Naranjos, courtyard of the orange trees. Now, before we can appreciate more Islamic gardens in Al-Andalus, we have to understand a major development in the wider Islamic world that enabled these gardens to develop and flourish. I told you about the Umayyads. So the agrarian policies of the Umayyad rulers in Al-Andalus, including their widespread appreciation for beauty, their thirst for knowledge, all of this led to a development called the Greek Revolution. So between the 8th to 13th centuries, Many different plants were exchanged and brought to Andalus from regions such as China and India to a little bit more closer North Africa. So the Umayyad rulers of Al-Andalus and later rulers encouraged people to introduce new abundant types of plants from around the world and acclimatize them to the environments of Al-Andalus. So the Mayans and later rulers created extensive botanical gardens near their palaces or next to their pleasure gardens. They employed experts to tend to these botanical gardens, and they appointed them literally with the title of royal gardeners. So these scientists not only studied botany, they studied what they called the art of agriculture. Imagine, they thought about it as an art, not just a science. So many of these scientists and royal gardeners authored written texts, agricultural treatises, and these books are then used for many centuries. Now, medieval Islamic scholars were not always able to fully acclimatize some species. Things like peppercorn, Chinese cinnamon, which is called cassia, or incense, these didn't really adapt so well to the Andalusian environment. But they did achieve great results with things like saffron, dates, sugarcane, cotton, pomegranates, and citrus fruit. So I'm going to bring you to set number 2. Another example of a plant that did not adapt well to the environmental conditions of Al-Andalus, but nevertheless still came to be traded very often to the region. Very good. You are right. Go ahead. Cloves. Yeah, in Al-Andalus, cloves were called karanfus. This spice originated in the Indian Ocean world. From there, cloves were traded across the Mediterranean to Al-Andalus. So unfortunately, cloves just really couldn't adapt well to the soil of Al-Andalus. But it was still traded, it was still used in many ways, including in gastronomy. The spice is used to flavor stews, sweets, and drinks. Cloves were also used in medicines created by Andalusian stomach against various ailments. So hopefully you've started to see that in Andalus, gardens played really important scientific roles, beyond serving as aesthetically pleasing spaces. These gardens were often used for botanical experiments in order to produce more scientific knowledge on agriculture and pharmacology. That is, they were studying how to make medicines from various plants. So when we talk about the Green Revolution, we're referring to this historical period in which new crops, new agricultural techniques were being introduced to the Iberian Peninsula, resulting in environmental changes as well as new circulating knowledge on horticulture that's going to inform advancements in agriculture, medicine, food science, and the culinary arts. Now, there's one additional development that really supports the Green Revolution in Al-Andalus, and that is the translation movement. So the translation movement was a period of about 2 centuries, between the mid 8th to the late 10th century. And it was a movement of very large scale intellectual activity that involved the translations of ancient Greco Roman scientific and philosophical knowledge into Arabic. So the movement was initially centered in the Abbasid capital of Baghdad, but the movement very quickly spreads beyond Baghdad to the eastern provinces of the Abbasid Caliphate, as well as even further beyond. So it's an intellectual movement in which Muslims, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians are all working together to produce translations of this vast knowledge from the Greco-Roman world. Now, it's important to note that the translation movement is actually it's too humble a term for what was actually happening. People from the Islamic world were working together to seek out books, seek out this ancient knowledge, make those words accessible into Arabic, but they're also elaborating on them. They're creating their new knowledge based on what already exists from the ancient Greeks. So they're applying this knowledge, they're circulating the new knowledge across the Islamic world and beyond. And so they're contributing new knowledge in many fields, mathematics, physics, metaphysics and philosophy, theology, engineering, medicine and surgery, astronomy, astrology, like you name it, they were thinking about this knowledge and contributing to it in fantastic new ways. Now, some of you may be familiar with the translation of Vedic because it's through these global networks that Greco-Roman knowledge spread to medieval Europe. So it's thanks to the Abbasid Caliphate and beyond that medieval Europeans came to access people like Aristotle. So again, it's not just the translation of Greco-Roman scholars like Aristotle that's spreading to Europe. Arabic speaking scholars are also adding innovative, groundbreaking additions to knowledge that's also spreading across the medieval world. So much so that some medieval scholars in Europe said, I'm not going to read Aristotle until I get the compendium by my fellow Arabic speaking colleagues so that I can understand Aristotle. So that's happening quite often. So the movement was so massive that at some point, Arabic speaking scholars had to travel to the Byzantine Empire to really seek out very rare arcane texts that were very hard to come by. So if it weren't for their work, some of these texts or versions of these ancient Roman texts, Greco-Roman texts, would have been completely lost to us today. Now, let me give you an example of how this worked in the context of Al-Andalus. So scholars in Al-Andalus built on the knowledge of the ancient Greek physician Dioscorides. Gotta take a breath with that one. So his text called De Materia Medica covered extensive knowledge on botany and pharmacology from the ancient Greco-Roman world. This ancient text was translated into Arabic in Baghdad in the 9th century during the Abbasid Caliphate. Now, eventually, about a century or so later, Muslim scholars decided that that 9th century translation was no longer sufficient. And so, in the 10th century, the Byzantine emperor sent a copy of De Materia Medica to Umayyad Emir Abd al-Rahman III of Cordoba. So remember, he's sending the original text, which is written in Greek, to Al-Andalus. The emperor also sends a monk whose name is recorded as Nicholas. Nicholas also is sent by the emperor to Al-Andalus to translate the Greek text into Latin, from which the ruler's Jewish physician then translates the Latin into Arabic. So the ancient Greek text reports a number of plants and their properties and various uses. One of them is the third scent on your list. What is it? Very good. Rose. Yes, rose. So Dioscorides describes the rose shown in the manuscript here, which gave you a hint, but you didn't need it. He describes the rose as a plant that was valued in the Greco-Roman world for its cooling effect. It was also used at that point in time as an eye ointment and for compresses used for abdominal inflammations and skin rashes. Now, in Al-Andalus, the scent was called Borki. Wild rose was introduced to Andalus from the Islamic world, and we get a lot of different varieties. So we have the red rose, the rose from Damascus, the white rose. Some of these were all the more popular roses in Andalus. And as you can imagine, this is a flower that very commonly inspires Andalusian poets. So in Al-Andalus, roses were used to manufacture various cosmetic products, such as syrups, oils, perfumes. And the rose is actually a pretty good example here of how scholars in Al-Andalus are experimenting with plant propagation and other various techniques in their own gardens. Again, this is knowledge that they would then write about and disseminate in their written texts. So if you But one of these examples of these agricultural techniques that are experimenting with is called grafting. This is essentially when two tissues of plants are joined together so that the tissues then grow together. So the gardeners and agricultural scholars of Andalus were masters of this technique, which they used with plants like fig trees, apples, um, grapevines, almonds, that kind of thing. Okay, so we've seen then how the translation movement laid the foundations for this green revolution. One additional development that was foundational for these Islamic gardens in Al Andalus, without which no Islamic garden would be possible, is irrigation. Yeah, you're great. It's like water, water. Yeah. So responsible water management contributed to the scientific and cultural explosion of gardens in Al Andalus. Water was important to gardens and country estates in a variety of forms. So I just heard irrigation, that's absolutely essential. They also take the form of fountains, channels, ponds, and cisterns, um, the irrigation ditches. It's also just, as part of these water wheels that I'll show you in a minute. Now, in the Islamic religious tradition, water is considered a divine gift that does not belong to humankind. We do not own water. Instead, one is obligated to share water fairly with those who need it. So, based on this worldview, engineers in Al Andalus distributed water according to very strict schedules and by means of these irrigation channels to ensure that water was available to every plot of land according to its size and based on the amount of water available. Now, in the 10th century, an official institution was established to administer water usage in a fair and proper manner. In English translation, this institution was called the Government of Water Distribution. Sense. And scholars have argued that that Arabic institution was the precursor to the contemporary Tribunal de las Aguas in Valencia. Yeah. So narrow irrigation canals were the main conduits that distributed water over large landscapes and around small gardens. Irrigation has been used since at least ancient Babylon, maybe even earlier. The Romans then used that knowledge as they're creating their global network systems of aqueducts and irrigation networks. And so then in Al-Andalus, engineers are building on that knowledge to improve the Roman aqueducts and expand them to increase the agricultural productivity of the land. Okay, so this is an example of what I was mentioning before, the water cisterns. So rainwater cisterns were also constructed in Al-Andalus to provide a reservoir from which water could be distributed via a channel system. In addition to their practical use, cisterns and ponds also provided often an aesthetic purpose in gardens. So the most famous courtyards and gardens in the wider Islamic world featured large ponds like we can see in the 14th century example at Alhambra in Granada, which you'll hear me talk about again later. I promised you water wheels. Water wheels are an incredibly important method of harnessing river water. Some of these wheels were more than 50 feet in diameter, which is incredible. So the water wheel shown here is located on the Guadalquivir River. If you want Vikings, this is your river, actually. The Vikings actually came to the Guadalquivir River, but that's not the talk today. Anyways, so this water wheel dates to sometime in the Islamic period of Cordoba. It's not exactly clear when it was constructed, but scholars understand it to be from this period. In addition to these kinds of water wheels, there were much smaller water wheels that were used that were powered by animals. So these kinds of water wheels would have been used in smaller fields, particularly to raise well water. So many water wheels of this kind actually still exist today, particularly in the central steel region. Most of them, though, are no longer in use. But again, as you can see, we're seeing the engineering and administration that goes on behind the distribution of water, which goes then to the gardens, the orchards, and the fields of crops. Um, you've seen how scholars are acclimatizing hundreds of species of plants from the wider Islamic world and further beyond. All of this is enabling scholars to leave a vast body of knowledge on agronomy, cuisine, and dietetics. Now, while I just mentioned the topic of cuisine, that was the best I could do for a transition. I'm sorry. Let's turn to set number four. Set number four. Here in lemon lime. Nope, no, no, not minced. Good guess. Oh, it's getting hard finally. Yeah. What's that? Nope. Anyone else? Lemongrass is a good guess. It's not lemongrass. Let's do it. Ginger. Some to be the no. So ginger originates from Southeast Asia. It was eventually introduced to Andalus by Arabs. Its cultivation, however, was again not terribly successful. So the climate of Andalus is far too harsh for ginger. It does not grow well there. One medieval Andalusian doctor describes a ginger jam in his text called Treatise on Foods, and he recommended the ginger root for geriatrics. Ginger root, right? So you've seen by now that there were many kinds of Islamic gardens in Al-Andalus. Botanical gardens dedicated to plant acclimation and experimentation, orchard gardens that were dedicated to the cultivation of fruit, and pleasure gardens for relaxation and spiritual contemplation. In many of these gardens, but especially the so-called pleasure garden, or I would translate it from the Arabic as gardens of delight, the experience was meant to be a multi-sensory one, where one could smell the aromas of flowers, hear the relaxing sound of water from fountains and pools, as well as see the play of light and colors, and of course, taste the most exquisite of fruits. As you can kind of see in this image here, water especially becomes a decorative element in gardens. It serves many purposes, including the lighting effects, the soothing sounds for a relaxing environment. It's also frequently used as a mirror to sort of highlight, right, the visual effects of architecture so that these could be better reflected. Now, whereas gardens and other cultural traditions, I'm thinking of something like the English gardens, for example, which were meant for walking. Islamic gardens actually have a different purpose. They're much more meant for rest and contemplation as spaces of meeting. They're spaces of peace. That's really the purpose they serve. Now, for the last section of this talk, I'm going to introduce you now to some rather famous examples of Islamic gardens. So we got to talk about Grenache. Grenache began as a small hilltop fortress during the Umayyad period. As least as early as, well, 889 CE is the year scholars go with. Now, nothing is left of that original building. However, the community that grew up around it still remained. So indeed, that site was chosen for its high central position, overlooking a landscape of rivers and trees. Well, in 1238, the local rulers began the construction of the palaces and the fortress complex that is known today as Alhambra. It was built on Sabika Hill along the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And the complex built on and incorporated the remains of a palace and fortress from the 11th century. That all said, what you're seeing here and what you would see if you, I'm sure some of you have been to Alhambra, everything you're seeing today basically dates to about 13th and 14th centuries. All right. Now, during the last Muslim dynasty of Al-Andalus before the Reconquista, the Alhambra was a self-contained city, separate from the rest of Granada below, which is not how it really operates today. So the site contained much of its own amenities, things like a tannery or a combination of old monks, baths. It very much operated as its own city. Now, a traveling Austrian physician traveling in 1494 goes on to describe Granada and its gardens during his voyage around the Iberian Peninsula. So I'm going to give you a quote from what he says about it. Quote, we went up to the Alhambra. We saw their countless palaces, paved with the whitest of marbles, adorned with lemon trees and myrtle bushes. All is so superbly, magnificently, and exquisitely built, of such a variety of materials that you would believe it to be a paradise. I cannot relate all that I saw. Unquote. So he's impressed. Today, the Alhambra is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. If you travel to see the gardens at the Alhambra today, as much as during the medieval period, you will notice a fantastic arrangement of a particular plant. There's many plants, but I'm thinking of one in particular. It's scent number 5 on your list. I heard it. It's cypress. Cypress. Very good. Yeah, thank you. There you go. Cypress. So cypress originally comes from the Eastern Mediterranean and the Balkans. The cypress tree is referred to in Andalusian agricultural treatises and was used extensively in the Andalusian landscape, including in gardens, country estates, and orchards. It was also used to produce many pharmacological remedies, as well as its use as an insecticide. It was also used in cosmetics. Now, next scent I'm going to give you already. The next scent is not specific to Granada, but since the Alhambra is associated with a number of Muslim and Jewish rulers before the Reconquista, I wanted to share a scent with you that was indeed exchanged throughout Al-Andalus that is often associated with wealth and rulership. This one is going to be hard. What is it? Oh, you got it. Myrrh. Myrrh. Yeah, there you go. There's myrrh. Yeah. So it's a South Lake resin that comes from the bark of certain trees. Myrrh originates from the Horn of Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. It was traded to Egypt already during the time of the Roman Empire. So it's already being exchanged in pre-Islamic times. It doesn't tend to ship very well, though. But according to the Andalusian geographer Al-Bakri from the 11th century, myrrh could be grown in the Catalonian mountains. So the people of Al-Andalus used myrrh to take care of the eyes as well as ailments such as earaches. There you go. Next slide. All right. Next is on my garden, Sevilla. So in Sevilla, we have to talk about the Real Alcazar, which was a palace of a number of Muslim and Christian dynasties. It was a palace during many Muslim and Christian dynasties, I should say. Originally, it was the site of a Islamic citadel of the city, built in the 10th century by the Umayyads. But if we move to around 1248, the site becomes progressively rebuilt and replaced by new architecture and gardens. So again, when you go to the site today, you're not going to see the stuff of the Mayans. That legacy is based on the fact that their site existed before what was built on top of it. Any Game of Thrones fans? Yeah. Yeah. So if you've seen Game of Thrones, you probably are familiar with this studio. Now, poetry, I'm going to move on to your next set. Poetry from this period describes a number of plants grown in the gardens of the Alcazar, including scent number 7. Virginia? Nope. That's a good guess. Not jasmine. Go ahead. You know it.
Only because I was cheating longer.
What is it?
Violet.
Yeah, so one of the most popular varieties of violet is known as Vanessa. Did I have it? Yeah, Vanessa. On the loose. So this fragrant flower was widely appreciated by the poet, as you can imagine. It was used for a variety of things to create tonics, syrups, jams, and perfume oils. And the Prophet Muhammad said, well, if you have violet oil, it is the best of all the oils. Unquote. Slide. Now, on the outskirts of Sevilla, so outside the medieval city walls, a 12th century ruler ordered the construction of palaces on a drained lake. He called the site Buhaira, so meaning lagoon, and he had plantations set up around the palaces, irrigated with water that was brought from a Roman aqueduct. So the Buhaira Okubra, to use the full name, later becomes known as the Huerta del Rey. In Al-Andalus, more widely, more than 30 varieties of pear were cultivated, with the best known varieties coming from Granada and Guadix. From these two places, pears were sent to Al-Buhaira for acclimatization. So that's Sevilla. All right, Toledo. So in Toledo, none of the royal palaces from the 11th century survive, unfortunately. But we know about them from descriptions and Arabic texts. So what you're seeing are much later gardens built on top of the former sites. Now in Toledo, the Garden of Victory, as it's called, was created near the river Tagus. And it's later known under Christian rule as the King's Orchard. It seems that the garden was located next to the Palacio de Galiana, and as it's known today. Now, the garden was built by the leader of the Kingdom of Toledo, Al Mahmud, who's not to be confused with the Abbasid leader of Titus and Nathan. So that happens in the 11th century CE. This enormous garden, and again, what I'm describing right now is not what you see here, so you're going to have to imagine it. This enormous garden featured a huge reservoir, water wheels, water clocks. It was surrounded by glass pavilions. And so the garden was greatly admired in its time and must have been a spectacle to see. Now, the ruler Al-Mahmud entrusted 2 famous scholars from Toledo with the job of caring for the gardens. So we have Ibn Wafid and Ibn Busana. The garden's crops included things like eggplant and carrots, which were grown to great acclaim. Also cultivated were pumpkins and squash, cucumbers, lettuce, along with fruit trees that included plums, apricots, bitter orange, and lemon. According to the Arab geographer Al-Sudi from the 10th century, lemon, along with bitter orange, were exported to the Arabian Peninsula and subsequently traded to Iraq, Syria, and Palestine before reaching North Africa and Al-Andalus. Lemon is mentioned in some of the Andalusian agricultural treatises, including those by Ibn Wasal. And according to his own writings, this garden in Toledo also grew many aromatic spices and herbs, including saffron, caraway, and coriander. Now, one of these spices that he mentions is step number 8, which was not available to you because I messed up with the ordering, so I'm just going to give it to you. Sorry about that. Cumin. Cumin. Called kamun by the people of Andalus. According to some Muslim authors, cumin originated in Turkestan and China, while others believe that the plant came from the Nile. Either way, cumin was introduced to Al-Andalus by Muslim traders. And some scholars recount that there were a number of species of cumin in Al-Andalus. You have the common kind that you see here. There was also one that was apparently laughing color, one that was yellow in color, which they called Persian cumin. And this was a spice that was used for preparing fried meat dishes. It was used to flavor vinegar and sauces, and it was used as a digestive aid, which it's still used for today. Slide. Okay. Yeah. So through these important case studies around Al-Andalus, from Cordoba to Granada, Sevilla, Toledo, I hope you've gotten a sense of the many purposes and meanings that were offered to the people of Al-Andalus. There's one very important aspect of gardens that we haven't yet covered, though, and that is belief in spirituality. Now, in pre-Islamic times, gardens and agricultural practices sometimes contain superstitious meanings that can be traced to Nabatean agricultural practices, particularly in the region of Palestine. Does anyone know where you might know the Nabateans from? Petra. Yeah. So if you're familiar with the site Petra, that's the Nabateans. Yeah. So such beliefs, such superstitions, and I'll give you a couple examples. They later come to be seen as not fully acceptable by those who practice Orthodox Islam, but those magical beliefs and practices were nevertheless frequently adopted by local farmers. So let me give you some examples. For instance, if a tree is planted when the moon wanes, it will be weak. It will grow slowly and bear little fruit. And even today, some farmers silently observe the moon phases before undertaking certain agricultural practices. Another example, when a tree does not bear fruit, the caretaker must approach it carrying an axe and accompanied by a friend. If the caretaker loudly announces that he intends to cut down the tree, the friend should persuade him to let the tree live for one more year. And if this is done, the tree can be expected to bear abundant fruit the following year. Now, moving from pre-Islamic times to Islamic period, in the Abrahamic faith, Islam included, gardens have spiritual associations with eternity and paradise. Right? For Muslims, Christians, and Jews living in Al-Andalus, gardens in this period were similarly associated with eternal rest. So gardens embody the metaphorical flowering of the human spirit and the discipline to educate the soul as it transforms into a garden that offers flowers and fruits. For this reason, it's not unusual for Arabic-speaking Muslims today to use the term "win the garden." It refers to the spiritual wealth that is associated with seeking perfection in good behavior. Now, beyond the spiritual and metaphorical associations of gardens, the plants cultivated in them also served religious purposes in tangible ways as well, including scent number 9. Any guesses? What's that? Nope. It's hard. Like, it's like, no, it's not. It's not like myrrh. It's not resin. What was that? What? You're right. That's fine. Yes, sandalwood. So during the medieval period, a number of species of this tree originated from the coasts of India and Malaysia. The wood produces an oil that was used in Andalus as an aromatic ointment. And that's according to the 14th century writer and traveler Ibn Battuta. So Andalusian doctors would prescribe people to inhale sandalwood for brain congestion. I have no idea what that is, but apparently it's important. Palpitations and physical weakness. But most importantly, sandalwood was used to perfume mosques during the most important religious ceremonies. So, I hope you've enjoyed this multi-sensory garden tour about Andalus. Before you continue the tour into the actual garden, I want to conclude by returning to our former friend, the storyteller, who started us on this journey. He writes, and you'll have some on the slide, of dwellers of Andalus, what blessings you enjoy, water, shade, rivers, and trees. The garden of eternal happiness is not abroad, but here in your lands. But I would choose this place for thee my choice. Believe not that tomorrow you shall enter hell. One does not enter hell after having enjoyed paradise. Now, as Islamic art historians have argued, gardens are not simply containers of ornamental plants, nor a collection of foliage. They provide a set of visual and, dare I say, multi-sensory relationships that include the architecture, the landscape, as well as the people around it. So the heritage and legacies of the people of Al Andalus live on today, both in the living gardens that survive and continue to be cared for, but also in the horticultural and agricultural knowledge that has circulated around the world, and indeed we continue to build on still today. So as you stroll through the McGovern Centennial Gardens, I invite you to consider how this knowledge is reflected in the garden landscapes around you. So with that, you can go to the next slide. Just want to say thank you for your attention. You've been amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for listening.